There are new, terrifying, and utterly bombshell claims echoing through the corridors of British power tonight. Whispers from the deepest, most heavily guarded royal circles suggest that King Charles's battle with cancer has reached a catastrophic, incurable stage, and the monarch is now quietly fighting what may be the final, agonizing days of his historic life. But exactly 5 minutes ago, the absolute unthinkable happened. Prince William and Princess Anne stepped forward together, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a stunned press corps to deliver the devastating announcement that Great Britain had dreaded, but never expected to hear so suddenly. King Charles had suffered a severe, paralyzing cardiac crisis inside the historic walls of Windsor Castle. It was a terrifying medical emergency followed by dangerous cardiovascular complications that forced his private medical team to immediately and indefinitely suspend every single one of his royal duties. Before we expose the highly classified medical files, the chilling family confrontation that shattered the palace's silence, and the exact moment Queen Camilla realized her power was being ruthlessly stripped away, I respectfully invite you to take a brief moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. We are building a dedicated community committed to uncovering the raw, unvarnished, and deeply hidden realities of history's greatest icons, and it would be an absolute honor to have you on this journey with us. The room inside the White Drawing Room at Windsor Castle fell into a deafening, suffocating silence as Prince William stepped up to the lectern. His hands gripped the wooden edges so tightly his knuckles turned white. He spoke with a voice that was ruthlessly controlled, fighting to project the absolute stability of the state while his world fractured behind closed doors. Beside him, Princess Anne's face told a profoundly different, tragic story. It was a mask of absolute, unshielded devastation. She held a lace handkerchief in her hand, her fingers trembling with an emotion the public had rarely ever seen from the Princess Royal, yet she never once raised it to her face. The prince confirmed the terrifying truth. King Charles had suffered an acute cardiac episode immediately following a highly stressful private government briefing. The king had collapsed entirely without warning, falling unconscious to the cold floor of his study. For critical, agonizing minutes, the sovereign of Great Britain remained completely unresponsive as sheer panic erupted among his personal staff. When Charles finally opened his eyes in his private medical suite, hooked to a complex array of whirring machines and monitors, he did not ask about state papers. He did not ask about the crown, his scheduled travel, or his unfinished correspondence. He looked at his personal physician through the dim light of the medical wing and asked one single haunting question. Have William and Anne been told? That single, desperate question exposed the raw, unvarnished reality of whom the king truly trusted when the survival of his reign was on the line. As the press room emptied, a senior private secretary made a silent but seismic move. He carried the king's sealed red dispatch box, the ultimate heavily guarded container of sovereign authority, and instead of returning it to the king's quarters, he handed it directly to Prince William. The message was loud, clear, and undeniable. The machinery of the British monarchy had officially shifted. But behind the heavy guarded doors of Windsor, a deeply emotional and highly volatile family crisis was exploding. Prince William was not preparing for a glorious succession. He was entirely paralyzed by the realization of how violently and suddenly his father's strength had evaporated. He entered a private sitting room, closed the door, and removed his cufflinks with unsteady fingers, placing them on the table as though even their tiny weight was too much for a grieving son to bear. He had spent his entire life preparing for the crown, but the reality of succession felt terrifyingly different when it was being triggered by his father's profound suffering. Princess Anne was similarly crushed, carrying an unbearable burden of guilt. She was haunted by a private, chilling conversation she had with her brother weeks earlier, where he had quietly admitted to a bone-crushing, absolute exhaustion. She knew his stubborn pride better than anyone. She had challenged him to slow down. But now she blamed herself for not pushing him harder, for allowing him to hide his physical deterioration behind the rigid demands of royal ceremony. And then there was Queen Camilla, seated entirely alone, staring at an untouched cup of tea in her private apartments. She was suddenly confronting a terrifying, empty future she had never allowed herself to imagine. The reality of the palace was shifting at lightning speed, and she was being left behind. The doctors were bypassing her. The critical medical discussions and emergency protocols were being directed entirely toward William and Anne. For the first time since her coronation, the Queen Consort found herself standing completely outside the circle of power, violently frozen out of the decisions that would dictate the future of the British monarchy. When Camilla confronted Anne in the corridor, demanding to know why she was being pushed aside and why she had not stood beside William during the national announcement, the Princess Royal delivered a response of brutal, cold precision. "The country needs stability," Anne stated, her voice devoid of any sympathy, not marital grief. The Queen's face hardened to stone, the humiliation sinking in, but she was completely silenced. But the true, terrifying scandal was about to detonate. That evening, a royal medical specialist broke protocol and handed Prince William a confidential, highly restricted medical summary. When William read the timeline of his father's health, his blood ran completely cold. The family and the world had believed the king's collapse was a sudden, unpredictable tragedy, but the secret dossier proved that the palace had orchestrated a massive, highly dangerous, and entirely deliberate cover-up. 3 weeks before the collapse, during a formal investiture rehearsal inside the Grand St. George's Hall, the king's body had violently warned everyone. Halfway through the procession, Charles had suddenly stopped, gripped the back of a heavy wooden chair, and his face had entirely drained of blood. For 11 agonizing seconds, the King of England went completely silent, his eyes glazed over, unable to speak or move even when Princess Anne screamed his name. The rehearsal was immediately halted. The heavy oak doors were slammed shut, and security secured the perimeter. Every single witness in that room was strictly instructed to describe the terrifying interruption as a simple scheduling delay. Anne had rushed to his side, catching his arm as he struggled to breathe, threatening to cancel the entire public event unless he submitted to a medical examination right then and there. The physician had warned Charles of an impending cardiovascular disaster, explicitly demanding urgent heart testing and immediate prolonged rest. But the king, driven by a desperate, reckless pride and an overwhelming fear of appearing weak, buried the incident. He ordered his senior staff to falsify the daily royal briefing notes. He actively chose to gamble with his own life, overriding medical advice and replacing his canceled medical appointments with demanding official meetings. He believed that stepping away would signal weakness and trigger national panic. When William discovered this calculated, systemic deception, his fear instantly turned to nuclear rage. He realized his father had not just been sick, he had forced the entire institution to participate in a suicidal lie. Armed with the explosive medical file, William and Anne marched directly into the king's private suite, bypassing the royal guards. For the first time since the collapse, there were no courtiers in the room. There were no PR advisors spinning the narrative, and no private secretaries taking notes. There was just a terrified father, a fiercely enraged son, and the sister who had watched him nearly die. William threw the highly classified file onto the bed, the papers scattering across the blanket, and demanded an answer. "Why did you decide we had no right to know?" Charles, looking incredibly frail and hooked to a heart monitor beneath his sleeve, tried to summon his old sovereign authority. He snapped back that an heir could not be burdened with every private fear, that the monarchy had to project invincibility at all costs. But William completely annihilated his father's defense. "I am not speaking as the heir," William fired back, his voice breaking with raw, unfiltered emotion that echoed off the walls. "I am speaking as a son who nearly learned the truth too late. You did not protect me. You betrayed my trust." Princess Anne refused to soften the brutal confrontation. She stood at the foot of the bed, looked her brother dead in the eye, and delivered the absolute kill shot. "You made us help you disappear in front of us," she said. "You forced us to watch you die slowly while smiling for the cameras." The monarch finally broke. Stripped of his royal defenses, Charles admitted his darkest, most deeply guarded fear. He confessed that he was terrified that if William stepped up and took control of the state, the country would instantly realize how easily the crown could survive without its king. He had hidden his failing heart and ignored the terrifying symptoms because his son's absolute readiness to rule terrified him. He felt his legacy slipping away, and he would rather risk death than become irrelevant. But the universe was not finished with the British monarchy. That very night, as the dust from the confrontation settled, a second terrifying heart rhythm disturbance violently struck the king. The medical machines screamed, the doctors rushed in, and the entire palace went into strict lockdown. The warning was absolute, undeniable, and permanent. King Charles would never ever return to his former life. The illusion of a full recovery was quietly and permanently erased from palace planning. In a moment of profound, unprecedented vulnerability, Charles summoned William and Anne back into the room for one final private reckoning. As the pale, cold morning light washed over Windsor Castle, the king looked at the two people carrying the absolute weight of his crown and delivered a heartbreaking apology. "I spent years believing duty meant never allowing anyone to see me afraid," Charles whispered, his voice incredibly weak. "I was wrong, and it nearly cost me everything." Right then and there, Charles officially authorized a massive, long-term transfer of major public and constitutional duties to Prince William. The era of King Charles as a highly visible, active monarch was officially over. But William refused to treat this monumental shift as a victory. He made it fiercely, unapologetically clear to the palace staff. He was not replacing his father. He was stepping up as the active guardian of the realm, carrying the brutal, crushing weight of the crown so his father could finally rest with dignity. William had to carry an even heavier burden back home to Kensington Palace. He walked into the living room where Catherine was waiting with George, Charlotte, and Louis. He sat down and explained to his children that their grandfather's heart had become dangerously weak and that their lives were about to change forever. Young George, sensing the gravity of the moment, looked up at his father and asked the one question that stopped William cold. "Does this mean you have to become king now?" William knelt down, held his young son's hands tightly, and answered with a quiet, powerful resolve. "It means grandfather needs us to be a family first." Thank you for joining us as we expose the unvarnished human reality behind the palace gates. If you were moved by this profound royal struggle and want to stay updated on the absolute truth, please take a moment to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to the channel.